My name is Christy Rivers. I'm an attorney at Swartz and Swartz, and today I'm here to talk about what happens if you're injured in a sporting event. Boston, Massachusetts is a huge sports town. Anybody that's gone to school here or lived here absolutely knows that. From basketball with the Celtics to football with the Patriots, there's a lot of sporting events happening. And a lot of times people are concerned as to whether or not there's any type of liability in any of the owners of the stadium or the stadium themselves if you're injured. So I wanted to dive into that a little bit. The most important thing to realize is that there is an assumption of risk when it comes to going to any type of sporting event. What that means is that you would have to prove to the court that whatever the injury claim is that you're making, you weren't aware of the risk of injury that was present in attending this activity. So for example, anybody that's been to a Red Sox game or any other baseball game in any other state knows that there's a risk that a ball may come towards you in the crowd. There could be a bat that comes towards you in the crowd. And those are what the court would consider an assumption of risk. By going to the game, you are assuming that there is a slight chance that something horrible, obviously not intended by the players in most situations, that could happen and that could lead you to be injured. Unfortunately, there's small print in pretty much every ticket. And if more often than not, it's on the back of the ticket. And when you flip to the back, you'll see that it's a waiver of liability. So all that means is that the facility wants you to know that you have to be careful. You have to be aware of your own safety. And things like a ball coming into the crowd, even in a sporting event like football, if the football came into the crowd and you were injured by that, that's something that you could relatively know that there was a risk of happening. And despite all of that, you voluntarily chose to go to the game. And that's really the difference. However, there are always exceptions in law. And I think one of the biggest exceptions would be the negligence. So what do we mean by that? We mean that even though there was the fine print on the ticket, even though you knew that by going to this event, you had a risk of something happening like that, there was an error of negligence by the facility. So an example of that would be, let's say that the net behind home plate at Fenway had a hole in it and the facility knew about it. They chose to have the game go forward anyways. They chose not to replace it. And through that hole, a ball or a bat came flying through it and you were injured as a result of that. In that situation, a court is likely to want to hear your argument as to why the facility was negligent in that area, and it wouldn't be something that would be dismissed outright. A lot of courts are very quick to dismiss personal injury claims that occur at sporting events, but that doesn't mean that there's no exception. So definitely, if there was any type of incident that happened that could have been prevented, if there was some type of defect in the cement floor that you were walking around when you're getting your favorite game time pizza or game time popcorn, if there was something that you fell on due to a defect that they should have known that it was out there, they continued to go on anyways and nothing was done to change it, that is an example of a time where you would be able to get some type of compensation for that. More importantly, if you're talking about being injured by a person, another spectator at the event, in recent events at Gillette, actually this past Sunday, there was a horrible case involved where a man was actually injured by an opposing team, in this case the Dolphins. An opposing team spectator did punch him twice in the face. It caused him to fall to the ground. I know there's still an investigation as to what happened, but if you're injured by a violent crime that was committed on the premise, that doesn't necessarily mean that the facility couldn't be liable for that at all. In this example, for Gillette, although their employee wasn't the person that committed this violent crime, the fact that they didn't have enough security personnel or another employee that was in the 300 section versus just by the field in the 100 sections, that could be a situation where Gillette, as a stadium, as a facility, can be held liable for that. And it's definitely worth at least conferencing with a personal injury attorney to see if the facts of your case might fit into one of those exceptions. It's not a blanket rule that the facility can never be held responsible, especially if there was something they could have done to prevent the violent crime from taking place. Because that, like I've stated before with negligence, that comes down to them being able to keep the stadium reasonably safe, properly maintained, which goes towards any defects in the concrete as you're walking around. And that reasonably safe goes to having security guards that are there to mitigate any kind of violent situations that occur. Also, kind of going to the violent crime, what if you're injured by someone who's incredibly intoxicated? Massachusetts is a state that recognizes the dram shop laws. That law really goes towards whether or not somebody was overserved. If anybody's ever been a bartender or a server, they know that there's definitely things to look out for intoxication. There's percentages of alcohol that are increased if you have, for example, a Bud Light versus an IPA beer, or a pounder beer versus like a simple smaller ounce beer. If the facility was negligent in allowing an intoxicated person to continue to drink, they weren't cut off, they weren't removed by security, that alone led to the causation of your injuries, then you still might have a claim against the facility as well. Now, how to protect yourself at a sporting venue. The most important thing, and I'm sure any lawyer will say this, is to document everything that happens. Those are usually used as exhibits later on, whether that's in the discovery process and it ends up settling, or whether that's all the way into a trial where you're introducing that exhibit at that trial, or at least that could help in the pre-trial stage if you're trying to work towards a settlement, to show them the causation, to show them the negligence and exactly like how that liability is purported onto that facility. So I would say the most important thing to do, you need to identify witnesses in the case. That's any type of person that you can give to the attorney that you've spoken with, that they can talk to, they can hire an investigator to speak to, especially in sporting events. Although there's a lot of spectators that are watching the game, there's also a lot of spectators that are around. People sometimes get nosy, and sometimes you're right there and you can't not see it. I think it's really important, if you are injured and you are not in a situation where you're transported immediately to a hospital, you have the opportunity to look and see if there's any witnesses. Obviously, like I said, you're not being transported, which means you didn't need to seek immediate medical care. Do not waste time in getting medical care if that's what you need. But if it's a situation where medical care isn't directly needed at that moment, make sure a report is filed. Obviously, speak with law enforcement officers. And in this situation, let's say there was a security guard, that's your first stop to trying to let them know that an incident has taken place. All of that is information that is so incredibly helpful when you're speaking with a law firm about your potential claim and they're evaluating whether or not you have a viable complaint to file, or even preparing the case, or like I said, or even in the pre-case preparation, which means a possible settlement. It's crucial to prepare all of that information and to have that. So the best advice I can say is, if you're at a sporting event rooting for the most amazing sports teams in Boston, just be careful. And if there's ever an issue, then you definitely need to report it, keep track of your witnesses, and by all means, make sure that if you need immediate medical care, all of those things can happen after. In any event, if you're ever injured at any type of sporting event, definitely know that Sports and Sports is here with a very knowledgeable team that even at the very intake first process can sit with you, go through your notes as to witnesses or any type of police reports that you have, and really let you know if it falls into any type of exception, or whether or not you have a viable claim against the person that personally brought you any physical injuries. Thank you.